Welcome to the Yoga Connection with Zorananda. The Yoga Connection is a deep dive into everything yoga. Follow along with Zorananda and his guests as they discuss yoga history, spirituality, different practices, and the many misconceptions that have followed along throughout the years of yogic tradition. So welcome everybody to the Yoga Connection. My name is Zorananda, and I am sitting with an interesting fellow today who reached out to me, I believe, on my website, and just through the networking of podcasts and all that fun stuff, is that he found me through, I think, my podcast. He's listening to... maybe not my podcast, is through another podcast that you found me on. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome Christian Yordanov to the podcast, and we have a lot to get into. So introduce yourself, Christian, and let everyone know kind of who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Zorananda. Yeah, so my name is Christian Yordanov. I am a functional health practitioner. I've written 2 books so far. One is on autism. I published that in 2020. And my latest book is on longevity. It's called How to Actually Live Longer, Volume 1. I just published that in January of 2024 this year. And for a lot of my work has been with fairly helping people with fairly complex and or chronic health issues to restore their health using the functional paradigms of investigating the underlying contributors to their issues and helping them address those with natural means, diet, supplementation, stress reduction, and gut health, detoxification, all those ancillary things. And that's kind of what I do. My main work is I work mostly with women, some work with children, and the occasional man slips through the cracks. The kind of but that's a rarity nowadays. We just know that it just guys, we're like that. It took me all of my 20s. I was a little bit of a rock and roll lifestyle with all the partying and alcohol and all the other stuff. So it took me finding the woman that I would eventually marry to actually start doing things for my health proactively, right? So I think a lot of men, we kind of leave that until it becomes a bit of an emergency, and then we start, um, you know, appreciating the value of it.
Yeah. The interesting thing with that is I think there's just like a general kind of toughness that we want to exude, right? And when it comes to our health, I think there's just like weird carried through tradition, right? Especially with men, that you kind of have to ignore everything, and you have to ignore what other signs there are that you're in ill health, because it's like associated to weakness, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there's this like mental toughness, and there's this mental fortitude to overcome whatever is happening, when it's actually like the opposite. Like, your toughness and your mental fortitude is actually going to come from taking care of your health. It's going to come from doing the exercises, eliminating unhealthy foods. And I think there's this like adult mentality of, I can do whatever I want, right? So especially if it's around foods that we're eating, that and I think it is like a general thing as well. I think it's not just for men, but I find, like you said, it almost seems typical for guys to ignore those factors when having the discipline to have a regular workout schedule, to cut out just super shitty foods, And I think that's like the challenging part. It's not so much doing those things. It's not so much being like, okay, I'm going to go do this thing. It's what we say no to. It's what we want
Mm.
to eliminate and take out of our lives. And I had this thought recently that I think the struggle that people have with making lifestyle changes is, say, for like 10 or 15 years, right? So from the time we're late teenagers well into our adulthood, say within those 10 or 15 years, there are patterns and habits that are developed in that time. And so if it has to do with things that we associate to our personality, say if it's like foods that we eat, alcohol or smoking or whatever, that in those 15 years of building all that neurological connection, to suddenly say to yourself, okay, I've got to quit smoking, I got to quit drinking, I got to eat healthy food, I got to start exercising, you are now starting a war. Like that's how I started to think about it. In those 10 years, everything's good. Your body is at the whim of all those decisions, right?
Yeah.
And so as soon as you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to stop all these things, everything in your body that's used to all that stuff starts to fight against you. And those
Yeah.
shitty
Yeah.
thoughts start coming up like, oh no, like you don't have to work out today. Like just sleep in, man. Or, oh, like have a couple extra pieces of pizza, it's going to be okay. And so I started to
Yeah.
see it as like an actual battle that you're now
It's the
battling.
ego.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the battle of the ego because it's anytime you attempt to change your lifestyle or your diet, the ego perceives as, it's kind of its energetic sort of state is to remain the same, you keep the status quo. So I think that's an area where we kind of have to reframe things with with my clients is um, changing where you eat or what you do or what kind of movement strategies you incorporate into your day, or whether or not you take supplements or sleep or whatever. That's not who you are, right? These are just things you do. And once you kind of because especially this is another thing with guys, and the older they get, like I guess like a guy in his 50s, 60s, they'll be like, that's how the way things are. That's just the way I am. That's who I am. And to me, it's a little bit like, wait, hold on a minute. So what you drink, like having, let's say you're having a whiskey on a Saturday or a couple of whiskeys, that's who you are. Do you think you're that small? You're just a dude drinking a whiskey. So we start to kind of have this more philosophical discussion. And I think guys do come around, man. I think especially for, again, just to, because we are men, I have a better frame of reference. I think the biggest thing, what we are afraid of when it comes to this stuff is probably we don't want to know if the over the decades we've accumulated so much damage that now we probably are gonna develop cancer whether or not we do anything, or heart disease or whatever. It's like on the cards, and it's because of this sort of propaganda narratives that 1 in 3 people are gonna die of cancer, one of the other three is gonna die of heart disease. And so we are kind of conditioned that, oh, you will succumb to this. And when you kind of work with me for about 6 months or more, ideally, I basically try to deprogram and decondition that. It's like I personally do not think I'm gonna develop heart disease or atherosclerosis, even though that runs in my family. My grandmother had 4 strokes and died at the age of 84. I don't think I'm gonna get cancer, at least until I'm like 1995, if I live that long, and bar any accidents and other crazy shit. Um, I don't have that fear, and I want to kind of help instill that confidence in other people, because that those things develop solely by daily habits compounded over decades. If you undo the crappy stuff you're doing, that have you have been doing, if you make that your new identity, the new you, doing all these healthful things that support your health long term, all these things will develop probably for most people, because a lot of people are starting at 40, 50, but it's going to be way, way, way out in the future.
Yeah, and we're kind of almost touching on the longevity stuff that I want to kind of get into a little bit later, but
Yeah.
you're making a good point on like what's almost inevitably acceptable, and what can you influence, right? And this will kind of go into your work with autism, but I just want to touch on that. I think what is skewed within, say, like within males and within men, is they think that those like patterns and those beliefs and the things that they associate with their personality and with their identity is actually transient. So it's transient in the sense that it's actually malleable and it can be changed at any time. But there's this illusion that because it's built on tradition and because there's this kind of like loose, I don't know if I want to say loose, but there's this tie towards hereditary qualities and almost like DNA and genetic when it
Mm.
actually isn't. And that, like you were saying, like you have this period of their life where they built all these patterns and they built all these habits, that it's now the work of replacing those habits with new patterns, right?
Mm.
And it
Mm.
becomes a whole new lifestyle change. So what that person is looking at is not that they're giving up on things, because that's the excuse, right? That's the excuse to keep them as they are. It's that they're looking at a whole new person. And so whatever anxiety that they have or whatever fears they have of becoming that new person, who they are is going to fundamentally attack that, right? So those are going to be the thoughts that are attached to
Yeah.
the way that they eat and the way that they sleep and everything, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think this segues well because we're kind of looking at a paradigm between what is internally almost like a foundation to that person to what can be changed and like what can be fixed. And autism is an interesting thing because we're essentially told that if you're diagnosed with it, there's nothing you can do about it, right?
Yeah.
Like in any doctor that you see in the scientific community, they basically just say, "Yep, you have this, and there's nothing you can do." But they can prescribe medication, they can prescribe things to kind of dampen it.
Yeah.
So, kind of before we get into that, though, so what was the reason for you to get into working with autism and and people with that?
Yeah. So about 2018, as I was getting deep into the health side of things and looking into microbiome stuff and neurotransmitters, and I was reading this book on it's called Nutrient Power by William Walsh, PhD, and in there he detailed various bits and pieces of work with all kinds of people, from schizophrenics, people with depression, autistic kids and kids with ADHD, and even with people, violent offenders. So various prison populations. Very interesting read, and to listen to him on podcast talk about how he would be there would be with this group of guys on death row, and how intimidating the whole thing. I think they were like in a overnight somewhere, they were traveling, and that they had to bunk up with these guys somewhere. So very interesting thing. But what was interesting is the correlates between the various different, very seemingly very different conditions, schizophrenia, ADHD, violent aggression and violent behavior, and autism. And they have a lot of things in common. So various B vitamin deficiencies are common, certain zinc and copper imbalances are common in some of them. And he had a chapter on autism that I hadn't even started reading yet in the book. I was kind of skipping it. It wasn't interesting to me. But during that time, someone in my family told me that they suspect their little nephew was on the spectrum, and they were quite upset about it. So I thought the exact same thing that you just kind of said. This thing is it's just genetic. Um, and medicine likes to label things as just genetic until some decades later they figure out the etiological mechanisms and the pathogenesis and stuff, and then they sort of uh I suppose start it's I think the reason for that time delta is because then they'll have things to treat some of the symptoms, and they can use drugs, right? So the reason a lot of things are considered genetic is because of the sort of dogma and slow pace of change in science and medicine, despite us being told that we're kind of constantly at the cutting edge and stuff. There's a lot of dogmatism, as you know, and um, it's well known that it can take on average 17 years for new clinical research to actually make it into your doctor down the street's practice, right? That's 17 years, right?
Yeah.
So I started researching, looking at the papers in that books, and notes, and then over the course of the end of 2018 and all through 2019, I kind of was doing more and more. At some point in 2019, I said, "Look, nobody's gonna take me," because I was trying to help like moms in Facebook groups and stuff, and everyone was like, "Who the hell is this guy? You're not a doctor. Just shut up." So I said to my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, I said, "No one's gonna take me seriously unless I actually write a book about this." So yeah, I said, "Damn it, I'm gonna write a book." And 8 months later, I published a book, and yeah, people take it a little bit more seriously. I actually have had clients, doctors. I'm working with one family in the UK, and the mom is a general practitioner. It's come to the stage where s- doctors are completely clueless, and they're reaching out to like nutritionists and other functional practitioners to get help for their kids' autism. That's how crazy the world has become in the last few years. How much the prevalence of the condition has increased.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. It's pretty wild too that I think within the medical industry as well, I think the kind of like blinders that they have on, that they can't really help, right? That it's like built within their system and the structure, that there's like a disconnect between like how they feel about something and what their intuition would tell them, and what the like culture is in that industry, where everything is cold and calculated and very logical,
Evidence based.
and it that I have no problem with, right?
Yeah.
I think it's when there are like amateurs, so to say, like people like that aren't that don't have medical degrees, and they didn't go through the institution and academics and stuff, but because of what's available through the internet and through other professionals, that when you're kind of the outsider in a sense and you're gathering information, that you're not going to have the limitations of these institutions
Mm.
and their kind of like boards and their councils, because they have things to protect, right? They have
Yeah.
interests and they have investments to protect. And so if they have anybody within their system that's going to start challenging what their MO is, they can shut that down pretty easily, right?
Yeah.
And it's because there's a kind of a monopoly on information and how things are categorized, how things are viewed, and so it's a tricky subject because it's you're dealing with someone's child, right? Someone that they love, and so I find in kind of like the social justice world of like more of like the left leaning political kind of climate, is when you're looking at someone that has some kind of like quote unquote condition, right? Or they are just like kind of different in some way, that there's this celebration of who they are and what they are, and to keep them how they are. And so when you start to introduce the idea of like, well, you don't have to be that way, right? You can change things where your symptoms of your quote unquote condition can actually be far lesser than what you normally experience. And I think that gets underappreciated. And so like in the medical industry, they'll kind of team up with that kind of social justice vibe, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, no, 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 there's nothing you can do, but through the miracle, or not the miracle, through the wonders of science, we can give you this medication, but that medication is gonna cause you to have OCD, and then you'll have to get this medication, and then
Yeah.
that medication to treat
Yeah.
your OCD is going to give you this, IBS, and then because you have IBS, now it's going to do this, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's wild. Like I have, like my friend Gord, like he wasn't on the spectrum to be autistic, but at an early age, from he was like 15 or 16, he started like having signs of like being overly compulsive and having some anxiety. So he was put on pharmaceuticals, but there was this chain reaction where
Mm-hmm.
at one point he was on 70 different pharmaceuticals,
Are you
and it
kidding me?
actually like induced a seizure, and he developed a neurological disorder from it. So I
Jesus Christ.
and so this is what is fascinating, is that once you start to introduce like a more, let's say, like natural way, or an alternative way, by looking at your diet, by looking at supplementation, there's this weirdness, like taboo sense of actually doing that. So, and yeah, so what I wrote down some notes here, and what it seems to me is like this kind of duality between science and spirituality, and but no, maybe I'll wait on that, just so it can be in this on the same frame of thought. So, how does supplementation and diet and whatever else that you have like written in your books and what you offer, kind of convincing enough that it works?
Well, first of all, regarding the what you said earlier about the sort of it's definitely a leftist sort of seeming the agenda where people have overt that these are serious health problems that are causing them a lot of health issues and difficulty in life. Like a lot of these autistic kids there's some parents that I work with that their kids are largely or almost fully nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes these kids are at a fairly advanced stage, 6, 7, this sort of thing. And that's imagine being in that parent's position and not knowing if your child will ever be independent, and then what will your child do if something happened to you, or if when you one day pass. So these are very, very serious things. And what seems to, at least from my perspective, it seems like a lot of this sort of actually autistic and um this sort of whole acceptance and anti, don't do any studies, don't do any science, we're fine just the way we are, we're perfectly fine. It seems to be it definitely looks like it's an agenda, and it's sponsored, but it's spearheaded by um people that call themselves autistic, but they're, if you look at the spectrum, they're very much nowhere near that sort of nonverbal, severe gastrointestinal or immune system dysfunction, this kind of stuff, right? So they're very much. I don't want to say mild or severe too much, because that's another thing that you can't even say anymore,
Mm-hmm.
because again of this what you were alluding to earlier, right? Um, so my sort of retort to all of that stuff is, if you look at the research, right? Um, a lot of research has already found that autistic children, just for as an example, a lot of other conditions, there's a gut dysfunction element to it, but in autism, gut dysfunction is rampant, and the studies that have looked into it have also found associations between gut dysfunction and autism severity, and a number of other things in the book that I talk about have been correlated with autism severity, like hair levels of toxic metals, um, aller- allergies, various immune and inflammatory immune system and inflammatory markers have been associated with autism severity. So it's clear, there's clearly an association, and everyone, of course, then will tell you association doesn't mean causation.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was one study where they gave the kids an antibiotic, which only works in the gut, right? Not a systemic antibiotic. And after that antibiotic, they saw an improvement in autistic symptoms, right? Which was, but it was a temporary improvement. After I think it was like a few weeks or a couple of months, they started to regress back. So that's clear evidence that they don't want to be like that the way they are neurologically. Because if you go in with an antibiotic, obviously you're killing bacteria, right? um, if their whole behavior and neurological sort of software makeup changes, that it doesn't mean they want it to be the way they were, right? That's very clear evidence. And then because that specific antibiotic works on specific types of bacteria called the Clostridia family, some of those bacteria leave spores behind that then, quote unquote, like eggs hatch. So that's probably why they basically started overgrowing again and causing those problems again. So that's, for me, that's clear evidence that the children don't want to be that way. They are
Mm-hmm.
that way because of various things. Gut dysbiosis, which causes immune system dysregulation and inflammation. And we know that inflammation, as I discussed in my longevity book, inflammation is one of the primary drivers of aging, dysfunction, and disease. So if you have inflammation that's mediated by a gut problem, that inflammation can cause issues. It could be a skin problem for one person, it could be a headache for another, it could be neurodegeneration and eventual Alzheimer's disease or dementia for another. The way inflammation can cause disease and dysfunction in the body really is very individual. So, in terms of my approach to how we help the anyone in general, like it's always a similar approach, but with the autistic kids, it's generally we really our first focus is the gut. So we have to ideally do a stool test to figure out what's the lay of the land, as it were, right? Is there very low levels of the commensa, or the good bacteria as they're also known? Is there a lot is there an overt pathogen, or is there just your regular microbiota? You have a bunch of species there that are opportunistic, so they overgrow when there's dysbiosis, right? So we figure that out. We go in with gentle probiotic and herbal cleansing protocols, and at the same time we start improving the diet. And this is the big issue for most families that work with me. The kids are eating a lot of stuff that they shouldn't. So these two things, generally, if when they come to me initially with like sleep problems, maybe they're not growing super well, or they're constipated, these are very common things. These things start to get resolved in like 2 3 months, right? And then we have to, because I get so many complex cases, we then have to do further work to discover further imbalances. But usually, like when I just hear a kid is constipated or they're not sleeping well, well, I know sometimes we can, one session, we can address the sleep problem completely. And then in like 2 3 months of my protocols, generally the child is pooping either a hell of a lot better, or they're just pooping normal.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the diet thing is really interesting. Um, I have a family friend, so I this is a family that I grew up with that I knew since I was like 1 years old, and they have a son who's autistic. And when I was a kid, he was really challenging to deal with. Just like really angry outbursts, and he's like very obsessed with video games, and you're just like not allowed to touch anything of his. And over the years, he started to get like a little bit worse and worse and worse, until his mom changed his diet and took
Mm.
out bread and took out like pastries, and because he would just obsess over those things. Like there's a strange thing with diet and people who are autistic is that they'll just eat one thing over and over and over and over again, right? If it's just like
Yeah.
they and so when they changed his diet and they took out breads and pastries and stuff, he improved drastically.
Mm.
And this is the tricky thing is like, because there's a culture around it now, even though autism is a novel thing in humanity, I'm sure you can still kind of trace back to the 1800s, and just more like kind of circus terms of who these people are. But as a scientific thing, it's very novel. But
Yeah.
I think it sheds light on the resilience of the human body, really, that there is a possibility to change these things, and it's something to be open to, and to see that their hypersensitivity to lights and sounds and touch and stuff is a neurological thing, that there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of like output that's happening. And so if you can really identify the source of that output, say like in your case where you're working with the gut biome, and there is the science there that's showing, hey, with these people, these specific people, there's an imbalance with the bacteria in their gut.
Mm-hmm.
And so educating people that a huge part in how our brain develops and how we form these patterns, that it's influenced by these foods that we eat, and that neuroplasticity is a very real thing,
Oh
and
yeah.
that changes can be made to the brain. And we just have to get over the hang up of like, oh, you're trying to change me, right? That
Mm-hmm.
should be really a good thing.
Yeah.
And so one yeah, I'm going to try to segue into this. So I thought of a topic in understanding this, and it's you have two camps really that I noticed when it comes to, say, like a topic like autism. You have the scientific community, and then you have like the spiritual kind of religious community, where the scientific side has an objective and rational method to identify autism within reason, where the conditions or limitations that develop are recognized as like non-curable, quote unquote, where there's a fundamental physiological implement for things like sounds, touch, and lights to be overwhelming. And science seems to cater to what tools can be made to ease those overwhelming situations. Where on spirituality side, or like the religious side, they would say that something can be done to cure it, right? That like the miracle of God and the miracle of prayer, and where those experiences are most so founded on acts like miracles and spontaneous healing within the work of a shaman or a priest or a healer. But obviously those are minimal, right? Like those are kind of random occurrences. So what do you think about like what would you think about like the more spiritual side, where you have these people that look at something like autism, and they would think that as long as you pray and as long as you like surrender to God or the Lord or anything like that, that there's this like power that can be bestowed to be healing?
I definitely believe there's people that can do that, and I believe in the power of intention and prayer. But I also feel like these things are often cop outs. They
Mm-hmm.
are ways for us to hand over our power, to give up our power, right? Um, and after having spoken to plenty of moms, especially, and some dads with autistic kids, in a lot of the books out there, they're like sort of copium in a way. Like, how can I, what sort of mental gymnastics can I, you know, do to make myself feel better? And I understand why people do it. We do it all the time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
When I make a big mistake in life, and I mess up stuff, and I have to take responsibility, then I'm always thinking like, what, how will this serve me? How will I grow and learn out of this and become a better person? And the ego has to do that because it doesn't like its shortcomings being put up in in the light for too long or too often. So it's kind of normal. But I think if we just if we develop this more esoteric thread, right? Something I wrote. I pulled it up while you were talking in the book. So I talk about some of the heavy metals and what effects they have in the body. But what's interesting is that mercury. This is acute mercury poisoning, not like low grade, the low grade mercury that we all have, all of us, literally every single one of us. But acute mercury poisoning and autism actually have nearly identical symptoms, such as social withdrawal, self-injurious behavior, like you hit yourself and
Yep.
stuff, lack of eye contact, lack of facial expression, hypersensitivity to noise and touch, and repetitive behaviors. Now, if you actually look at the molecular mechanisms and stuff, how it does that with oxidative stress, damaging the blood-brain barrier, and all this stuff, it starts to make sense. But w- back in like 2019 or so, when I was getting into the testing hair for heavy metals and such, I came across the work of a dude called Dr. Wilson. I have one of his books, big book, and he talks in there about the anthropomorphic qualities of the elements, the metals. So for just a few examples, if someone is very high in iron, because iron is a very sort of brittle metal, people that are very high in iron, they tend to be more easy to slight or kind of anger quickly.
Mm.
Then, for example, a lot of musicians and artists are high copper types, and copper is kind of it's shiny. It's a great conductor of electricity, right? So it kind of makes sense if you have a lot of copper in your body and your brain, you are the inspiration that's in the ether. If you can think of that electrical current through the ether, you're a better conductor for it. So it really does make sense. And then you have all the heavier toxic metals. So lead is dull, but it's soft, and it's associated with a dull, a dull mind, like low IQ, right?
Mm.
And a lot of macho types, like army types, that are exposed to a lot of lead ammunition and the toxic metals, like you know, war machinery, or just cars and that kind of machinery. All those toxic metals, cadmium, for example, you get a lot of exposure, and then these guys actually, a lot of them are this macho type, a little bit thick, a little bit kind of
Yeah.
and that I really see that being a the anthropomorphic qualities of the minerals being expressed in the person. Then you had another one, is if you have a very high calcium, like on a hair test, like a very very high calcium, that's called a calcium shell. And I actually saw that with someone I was working with, and that can be, metaphorically speaking, the high calcium is a very sensitive soul, like a soft, uh, like a crab or something like that, builds this shell around them from the calcium.
Mm.
and that protects them from the world. So this can be people that are had a somewhat traumatic experiences during childhood and stuff, and they build this calcium shell from because this world is so sort of scary and stuff like that. So you could go on and on unpacking these, right? But I definitely see the quality of what we eat and what we sort of are exposed to, that builds our body, and then this vessel then assumes some of the qualities of those building blocks and materials. So there is definitely a spiritual and an esoteric and a deeper uh theme here, but I think at the end of the day, a- as below so above, right? So to be really, I think it's a little bit of a psyop to say all the greatest mystics and stuff were just fasting for months at a time, and just mutilating themselves. I think if you look at modern or ancient Greece, all of the guys, all of the philosophers, all these big ideas, these are created by guys who are definitely not slaves or poor. They were well fed. They had a lot of, they didn't have to slave and work like most of us have to. So they had a lot of time on their hands, and they didn't have a lot of these sort of difficulties that the common man has. And when you are in that well fed, nourished state, and you have no worries of whatever material stuff going on, then a lot of this creativity and inspiration can come, and then you can build amazing stuff, right? So that's kind of, I believe, just to answer your question very bluntly, I think a lot of that stuff is ceding responsibility, because then if you accept responsibility, then you have to take a bunch of massive action, and most people aren't ready to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point because, like, not many people are going to consider the constitution of their body and how it's put together, and to even think that there could be these kind of metals that are influencing how we're thinking and how we're making decisions. Um, and that because of our constitution, that we're going to accumulate more of one metal than the other,
Hmm.
and like you were saying, because of our environment, because of the foods that we're eating, the water that we're drinking, the air that we're breathing, and I like that idea that it's like a cop out, right? That whether it is the science community or the religious community, that the institution itself is going to have its own agenda of what makes it successful, right? And so if you have something that's working, why change it, right? Why? And so to be well informed to me is just simply that you can be within that system, yet you allow yourself to take a step back and to ask yourself some fundamental questions like, you know, is there something inherent within the system that wants to keep me believing this way, that wants to keep
Yeah.
me viewing things this way?
Mm.
And so, say if it's like a religious person that denounces everything scientific, and has a child that has these complications, and is whatever wherever on the spectrum, that it will be beneficial to take a step back and be like, "Okay, I'm going to go to the doctor and see what's up." But then don't just leave it there, right? Find someone like you where you have the opinion of the doctor and they say, okay, well, this is the only way to treat it. And then they find someone like you and you say, no, 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 that's not the only way to treat it. There's nuance to this, and we can implement a diet. We can implement these supplementations. We can do tests to get the readings of what all the metals are, and
Hmm.
what the gut bacteria is like, and then to then still respect the religious side that, like, yes, pray, yes,
Yeah.
like, be in touch with something greater than yourself, and to trust that you're taking the right steps towards alleviating whatever like troubles that your child is going to have. Because when I think back to my childhood, and I think back to my family friend, and how difficult and how hard it was to deal with him sometimes when he's in his outbursts, right?
Mm.
And to go from something like that where he was seemingly uncontrollable and random, right? At any moment, he can just freak out.
Yeah.
To then becoming an adult, changing his diet, and he's like almost a totally different person, and he loves
Wow.
it too, right? Like this is the thing. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
we're treating people with autism as if they don't have any anonymity, right? To for them to even express like, no, like I want to change this. I don't want to have these sensitivities anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so then to not narrow it down and to basically like fit them into this box of like whether it's on the scientific side or religious side of either like, oh, just this is the way that God made you and there's nothing that you can do, right? Or
Yeah, man.
like yeah, this is genetic and there's nothing that you can do. It's like
Yeah.
both sides kind of do that, right? It's strange.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
um yeah, so there's one thing that you said interesting about, or I think it kind of ties into this one question that I have, because the blame that's typically put on the reason for autism is vaccines, right? And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
where we see these like toxic metals show up are in the ingredients list of these vaccines, and it's like super touchy subject, like
Yeah.
and and so some of the kind of research that I loosely went into with this is the bundling of vaccines, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
wonder what your thought is, like, if um, if these doctors were to administer these vaccines in a larger period of time, and especially in the United States, like I don't know how it is in Portugal, but in the United States it's crazy, like they're
Yeah.
bundling
Yeah.
like 70 vaccines at once, like Canada's
It's
not
bad.
too bad, but at least to an extent, like we have control over that. We can be like, no, like we're not giving them my kid all these shots at once. And
Yeah.
so from what I've looked into is like a possible cause to the complications that these children are seeing is because they're getting such a high volume of these vaccines that have these like mercury, like ethyl mercury and stuff in them.
Mm. Yeah. Bro, this is such a messed up subject. I really
Oh
think
yeah.
I really think that not one is needed. Not one ever for anybody under any circumstances is needed
Hmm.
or beneficial. So absolutely, like the more you of these things you combine into one dose, the more of a risk the parent is taking. They're playing Russian roulette with their kids' health, and it's unfortunate because the people behind all of this, they're so crafty that they have made the people that are actually have done research, and they're like, no, hell no, right? they're they are painted to look like the crazy cooks that are anti-science or something. And any, like, that's the thing. I've heard this, I've seen this on a meme or something that says no parent that's actually done the research, right? Even like a cursory amount of research, like a few hours over a weekend, would has ever said, yeah, yeah, let line my kids up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's horrendous. And I have multiple books here that I've lent to friends, I've gifted to friends, and I've interviewed people on my podcast about the stuff. And um but here's the thing, I have to be in that, it's a delicate position. I mean, because I have clients that their kids have had like a bunch of
Hmm.
vaccines, so I can't be like, they're asking, what do you think of vaccines? I'm like, look, read this book, you tell me what you know what I think after you read this short book. So I tell them, I like to tell people, look, what's done is done. All we have to do is, if we can afford it, do some lab work, figure out where the imbalance is. Like, so we're not playing blind, right? And then let's start ameliorating the imbalances, be that nutrient deficiencies, be that chronic inflammation, like I said, gut dysbiosis. A big, I think, a big issue these vaccines are causing is because you're bypassing a lot of defense mechanisms. So when you have aluminum in your cheese, which melted cheese on a pizza actually uh, can have aluminum. They do have certain food additives that are, even in the EU, I believe in Europe, the E numbers, they have some of them with aluminium that are sanctioned by governments to be allowed. So, but the thing is, when you eat something like that, and most food has some level of toxic metal contamination, like vegetables will have cadmium, rice will have arsenic. Everything is contaminated to an extent, right?
Hmm.
Um, but at least with toxic metals, we've been around these things for since the dawn of humanity. So we have mechanisms to detoxify them. They're not as bad as these novel chemicals, and especially the more lipophilic ones that have an affinity for fatty tissue. And because of their structure, some of them are resemble hormones and can attach to receptors. That's why they're called endocrine or hormonal disruptors. That and they're difficult to make water soluble by the body to excrete, right? So they can hang around in our fatty tissue. So they're a bigger problem nowadays. But so when you eat, your gut cells, that's one level of protection, right? So they can spit out, quote unquote, certain toxins, right? Certain toxic metals they might not even get absorbed, right? So you have a lot of and then even if they get absorbed into the bloodstream, they can go to the liver, and then we have detoxification enzymes, and they can be either then merged with the urine, they can be pushed out into the bile, and then the bile can eventually travel out of the body. So there's a lot of defense mechanisms that we have, right? But when you inject directly to the bloodstream, and especially if that kid already has some kind of health issue, right? Or when there's a chemical that can make the blood-brain barrier permeable, like polysorbate 80, or 20, I forget which one they use, then you have a problem, right? And even I only use the word vaccine twice in my book, and it's to one of them, it was a peer-reviewed paper questioning how can we, given what we know about aluminum and what it does in the human body in terms of its neurotoxicity, how are we still allowing our, this is a researcher, he's head of a lab in the US as well. They have a lab, and he's like, how are we still allowing our children to be injected with like what is it, 1,500 to 6,000 micrograms, I think, by the age of 2 or something like that. It's a
Hmm.
lot. It's micrograms, but remember that it's all getting absorbed, right? Whereas you could have milligrams ingested, that very little of that, if none, to none, could be absorbed because of all those mechanisms I mentioned.
Yeah, and I understand the tricky part of that, right? Because we're dealing with an industry that historically has saved people, right? If you look at like the polio vaccines and like the and that and like measles and mumps and smallpox and diseases that have like wiped out people historically. So there's one side of it that seems to have the benefit of extending human life, but then like the weird 180-degree turn of then the same industry, decades later, creating things that have been hugely detrimental to people, right? Because then there's accounts of like vaccines in Africa and third world countries where they're doing a lot of harm to, let's say, like fertility and women becoming infertile, and so it's the thing that I that I remind myself is that it's okay to talk about these things, and it's okay to challenge the narratives, and it's okay to, um, have doubts, and just like you said, to accept it. Like I grew up in the Western education system, and so we were getting vaccines in the school that I was in, right?
Yeah.
And when I look at how my life was, there wasn't any dramatic negative effect from it. Um, and But that's not to rule out that there can be these negative effects, and it's when you see the onset of how much the scheduling of these vaccines ramped up from the 80s until now, right? Where,
Oh yeah.
like I'm 36 years old, and when I was in school, like we would have there'd be like some kind of like scare, if it was like meningitis, like some kid in our school had meningitis, and so they came through and they're like, hey, we have to like vaccinate because, if this spreads, this can be, it can be detrimental. It can be actually like life threatening. And so I got that vaccine and I was like, 13 years old.
Mm.
And I remember the nurse saying, well, you're either going to get a sore arm or you're going to get really sick. I ended up getting really sick, and I was
Oh,
sick for like 2 weeks.
jeez.
Yeah. And so um, when I look at all this, and I think to myself that I want to be a well-informed person. I don't have any children yet, but I ask myself, like, okay, when the time comes and I'm a father, like, what am I gonna do? Because there are some very real things that can create complications, like if your children contract measles or um, uh, tuberculosis or whatever, right? Um,
Hmm.
and so, one thing that I've noticed or kind of considered is the difference in our world today, say specifically in the Western world, right? That the world itself is cleaner, right? So if you were to go back like to the 1800s, where there was no pavement, everything was dirt roads, we were using horses for everything. There's literally horse shit absolutely everywhere. There's no proper plumbing. The world itself that we would have called a civilized world is gross, and
Yeah.
it's just a cesspool for diseases. And then
Yeah.
when you fast forward to now, the level of sanitation that we have, the plumbing that we have, and just the way that the cities are built, everything's a lot cleaner. And so my thought was like, okay, well, why would we need these vaccines, and why would we need the implementation of these things to prevent these diseases when the world that we live in the Western world, it doesn't actually allow for that stuff,
Yeah.
so
That's a
is like stuff like measles and mumps and like all these like weird diseases, are they not around because of the vaccines, or is it because we actually have a cleaner system that we're working in?
that's a that's a good question to be asking, bro, because uh, um the last I haven't published the second interview, but the last two guests on my that I interviewed on my podcast, both of them have written books. One is Dawn Lester. She wrote "What Really Makes You Ill" with David Parker, and then the other was Mark Gober, and he's written six books. And the last one was called "An End to Upside Down Medicine." I believe that's the last one. And in both of those books, and other books that I can also list off, the authors actually do discuss the fact that a lot of these eradications of various things like polio and whatever, they seem to coincide with improvements in sanitation, sewage, this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So if you put a gun to my head right now and asked me and it told me, look, if you get this wrong, you're getting your head blasted off, and then you ask me, um, are viruses real, and is contagion a real thing? Yes or no? I'd probably, without skipping a beat, I'd say no. They're not real, and it's not a real thing. That I believe there's more evidence for that after all the digging I've done. So kind of that that that's how I feel. And actually, Mark Gober was telling me when he was on my show during the Spanish flu, one of the biggest sort of pandemics the world has ever seen, allegedly, according to Wikipedia. They had experiments with people where they were like spitting at each other, coughing in each other's faces, like they were drinking their spit, the most disgusting things you can think of, to try to get those people yeah, that were healthy infected from the people that had this quote unquote Spanish flu, right? And they couldn't do it. And they've done a bunch of experiments like this, and they've not actually been able to prove uh, this whole theory of the contagion and stuff like that. And there's a lady, I forgot her name, Mark was talking about, that she's done a bunch of freedom of information requests with a bunch of different governments, and they cannot provide all the stuff, all the research around viruses. Um, uh, there's this thing. There's four sort of postulates called Koch's postulates of what it takes to classify an organism as what's it contagious, pathogenic, whatever. And none of this research exists to speak of, or at least they're not releasing it. So I think, just like a lot of other things, we've been fed a pack of lies, and most people will not question beliefs that were instilled in them from a very, very early age, because that's like starting to question, is black white, is white yellow, and we don't do that as adults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a couple friends that have really gone into the debate about viruses, and that it's that there's this whole thing back in, I think, the early 1900s. There was a French biologist, I think,
The
and
Champ.
yes, yeah, and that essentially there were two camps, right? There was one that was like, there's no viruses, and what this is that it's the body itself that's doing it, and it's a built-in mechanism that everybody has, and that's why we all go through it. And that, like, what it is of like getting sick at a certain time each year, like say if it's like November or something. So like I don't know how this is in Portugal, but like here in Canada we have terrible
Flu season.
winters, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So as soon as October, November comes, the temperature drops significantly, and then there's flu season, like you said. So, um, why it is that like the virus camp won out, is because of the potential of profit that was there, right? So
Yeah.
if you're in the camp of like, no, 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 this is just your body. It's like it's shedding toxins, and there's also just other factors of inflammation and just general poor health. That if you're on the kind of the pharmaceutical side, you're on the American Medical Association side, and your driving interest is profit, you're going to look at the camp that says, oh, there's no virus. You're going to be like, well, that doesn't help us. So let's stay on the virus camp, because then, there's something about the human condition, the human mind, is that when there's a fight, when there's a battle of some sort, you can recruit people a lot easier, right? So then you create this kind of adversary that you're calling a virus, and you're now telling people, we need to fight this, and we need to win this battle of health, and this is how you do it, right? So they're presenting the problem and the solution,
Yeah.
hand in hand.
Yeah, yeah. 100%, bro. And it's like it's there's so many holes, but you have to be truly be open-minded. And I think what we do is, it seems to be human nature. We look for evidence. I forget what Mark Gober had a great term for it, where um, you kind of your reasoning sort of. It's like if I tell you, oh, you have schizophrenia. Let's say you come to me as a doctor and I tell you, I'm diagnosing you with schizophrenia. If you believe me, you will then start constructing a narrative. You're going to be brushing your teeth. You're going to notice yourself, your self-talk. Like, oh shit, is that me? But oh, I'm here. I'm thinking this, and you could very well manifest that thing. So they're very smart in that they have they have this education system that is an amazing tool to create the the people that would then easily be controlled. And then once you go through this indoctrination system, these thoughts, these things, these are with you for life. And I truly believe that's why the psychedelics got so demonized back in the 60s. They thought they were going to cause disintegration of the human mind with them. That experiment probably didn't work out as they would have hoped, and they saw that people were actually breaking out of the paradigms that they were sort of indoctrinated into.
Yeah.
That's why all these things, LSD and the other things, were so uh were put like on these high schedules, along with these other heroin and other stuff. So um I think that's probably I'm not saying that's the only way, but that's one way a person can actually break. And I'm not saying you have to like do heroic doses or anything, but for me personally, that has been one thing that has allowed me to sort of break out and start questioning beliefs. And maybe that is why I believe the things I believe nowadays, and I listen to the podcasts that I listen to, and I actually find them valuable, as opposed to other. If you give that to somebody else, they'll be like, this guy's talking absolute nonsense. Like, they
Hmm.
literally think that person is not well, like they're a head case. And we are listening to that person like, oh my god, you're speaking so much truth. You have done so much amazing research. Thank you for your work. And then all the normies are like, this person needs to be like put in on a medication.
Yeah. Um, and I think it's because a lot of people can't help but stay within the box of their life, right? And it has a lot to do with comfort and survival, and just like the simple pleasures that they get out of the life that they live. And for the most part, that's been designed for them, right? And like we can't help it, when we come into this world and we're children. Um, the parents that we have, the house that we live in, the siblings, and where we live is designed, right? It's designed for us, and the way that I look at it is like the purpose of it is for us to either make a choice where we stay within those confines and we're totally fine with it, and we go along with the authority that keeps those confines there, or there's something that is inspired within us to start questioning like why the limitations are there. And psychedelics have helped me as well, many times in understanding the potential that I have as a human being to grow out of those confines, right?
Mm.
And so whether there's this like grand conspiracy that, the world elite have concocted where want to they want to have a monopoly on the control of human consciousness, essentially. And so where the hard part that I think that people find digesting is whether or not the foods that we eat, the medicine that we have, the vaccines that we have are geared towards these kind of limitations, where it's so subtle that we wouldn't even realize it, right? Because we're dealing with something that's working on a microscopic level, right? It's
Mm.
working directly with our cells and directly with the autonomic functions of our body. And so when we have these kind of like heavy metals, or we have these components within us that we don't even realize the effect that they're going to have on us. And
Yeah.
you know, I don't think that is so overwhelmingly controlling, where just like me or anyone else that grew up in the Western world, we got vaccines for whatever, that I have the confidence within me to think that I can exercise a self awareness to seek out the alternatives, right? That I have the capacity within me to say, okay, enough is enough. I want to see what the natural world has to offer, right? So
Mm-hmm.
to study herbology and to study what these different supplements can do. And I think this would be a good place to segue into the longevity stuff, because then we're kind of at a comparison here where the kind of old world medical system is counterintuitive to what the longevity practices are coming out with, right? So you have this old world kind of legacy of allopathic medicine, and you're trusting your doctor, to taking it into your own hands, a new paradigm of I'm going to get back in touch with natural herbal remedies and the advancements of the medical industry that can support that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. So, what is your stance or your thoughts on longevity?
I think if if you so my book is pretty short, couple hundred pages. It's gonna be a multi-volume series.
Mm-hmm.
But if you read my book as a regular person who's not been in the out media community for any length of time, you're going to get a lot of sort of subtle truth bombs, right? And so chapter one of the book, I so the each chapter is something you can do to increase your longevity, your health span and lifespan. But the first chapter is you first have to know what's killing you, right? So what's killing you is what I call the three primary drivers of aging and dysfunction. I have a little chart in there, and basically there's stress, psychological and physiological, and then inflammation and oxidative stress, and each one feeds into the other, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of overlap of what causes inflammation and oxidative stress, for example, or stress. And so there's a lot of I discussed some of the all the stuff you already know, like as a even as a lay reader. So toxins, alcohol,
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? So the that's the first thing a person has to understand. What is aging me faster than it should, right? So when you understand that stress ages you and causes disease, you will then start to make changes in your life. But until you actually realize truly what that means, so it's when I say it ages you in um uh degenerates you, I actually give an example from the scientific literature where if you look at something like a corticosteroid medication, so these are known as anti-inflammatories. So if you have, let's say, a skin eczema, or an autoimmune condition, or sometimes like celiac disease, or inflammatory bowel disease, so they will often give you a corticosteroid medication. This is a quote unquote, they call it an anti-inflammatory. But what is a corticosteroid? So a corticosteroid medication is a cortisol mimicking chemical. So it does similar things in the body as cortisol does. And what we have in very well recognized in the scientific literature is a bunch of different um, syndromes and diseases, that are conditions, I should say, that are induced by glucocorticoids or corticosteroids, right? So I have the list, a short list in the book, but these include, so people that have been started on a course of corticosteroids for whatever condition, rheumatoid arthritis, doesn't matter, have been known to develop psychosis, diabetes, panic disorder, osteoporosis, high blood pressure, glaucoma, like an eye disease, pancreatitis, and lipodystrophy, which is where the fat in the body accumulates around the trunk
Mm-hmm.
and the face. So these are all in conditions that are induced by cortisol mimicking drugs. So that gives us a model, an accelerated model of what cortisol does in the body if elevated chronically for a long time. And that is how that's sort of how I introduce the reader to to my methodology and my I guess my model and how I look at aging. So we have to reduce cortisol. We have to keep stress hormones low. So this is super important. And then I start explaining what raises cortisol, what raises your stress hormones. And this is where it becomes a little bit conspiracy tinfoil hatty. So I actually personally am starting to think that a lot of these quote unquote healthy interventions out there in the zeitgeist are actually pushed to the top there, to the top of our sort of attention, um, because they're actually harmful in the long term. So I discuss fasting, low carb and keto diets. In the next book, I'll talk about exercise in more depth, but I think a lot of this sort of, especially the endurance exercise like marathon running, all this ultra marathon stuff, I think that's extremely detrimental to the human body. But also a lot of these younger guys, and especially the girls, um, I really don't believe women should be exerting themselves that much. So all this weightlifting stuff, all this going to the gym 6 days a week, I think these things are being pushed at the top of our sort of thing that's healthy because they're actually aging us more quickly. And the reason for that is because all of these things, fasting, intermittent fasting, low carb diets, dieting, a lot of excessive exercise, stuff like that, these things raise cortisol and adrenaline and other stress hormones. And when cortisol is rises, it stimulates the breakdown of our tissues, our organs, our joints, our skin, our muscles, of course, even parts of the brain. And what does that do? Well, that causes those cells to break down so they can be turned into glucose. And that is cortisol's primary role. It's a survival role, right? So anything anything that puts you in that stress mode is detrimental if it happens long term. Now, if you're getting chased by a bear, or you have to fight for your life, or you have to run for the bus, or you have to go up and do a public speech for 20 minutes, that's fine. You can get into these states, into these stress states, because that's what they're designed for, acute survival type things, right? But we have to figure out, are we in a chronically elevated, or are we chronically in what I call stress mode? And if you are intermittent fasting 16 hours out of the day, you are,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're coupling that with a low carb diet or cold plunges. That's another thing that raises your adrenaline and all these stress hormones. So these are stressful things. So when you're young, you can do it, no problem. You don't feel the effects. Like I was doing this stuff about 5, 6 years ago, but the older you get, the less vital reserve you have, the less capacity you have to bounce back from these stressors. The more this becomes not a hormetic stressor, it becomes just a stressor, which means it's depleting you and degenerating you and aging you faster. And one quick thing I mentioned in that chapter, that first chapter that kind of lays it out, is actually they've done studies where lower a person's cortisol was, the younger they looked when they were being evaluated. And then they did a twin study where the older looking twin would usually die sooner, and the higher the difference in terms of the perceived age of the two twins, when there was a greater disparity, there was a higher chance that the older looking twin would die. So how your cortisol is aging you. The higher your cortisol level is, the older you will look, and the older you look, that's generally an indication of your metabolic health, right? So these
Mm-hmm.
are these are kind of some fun facts around cortisol and why we want to keep it low, basically.
Yeah, and it's not like it's easy either, right? Like,
No.
because we're gonna have environmental factors that are just are going to be spontaneous. They're going to happen, like you were saying, like if you're having to run for the bus, if you're suddenly have to do this speech or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Um, so what came to mind for me and what I wonder is possibly how um, those heightened cortisol levels are mitigated. Say if you are an athlete or you are training or you are like obsessed with working out and you're doing it, 5 to 6 days a week, that is it possible that the kind of supplementation and yeah, so the diet and supplementation, could that help mitigate that? So say if like, yeah, like I do CrossFit, right? Like I don't do it every
Hmm.
day. I do it once a week. I have a workout that I do with my brother on Thursdays, but for the most part, my job itself is pretty laborious,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
lifting a lot of just like railing and
Hmm.
steel and um, so I wonder then if, uh, yeah, that like diet and supplementation can actually help with managing those cortisol levels.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the actually in one of the chapters I talk about a study. It's in a military journal called Military Medicine. And so they did this mock captivity exercise where the new recruits, cadets or whatever they're called, recruits, they're kind of they are kept they kept awake all night and interrogated and stuff, right? Like a mock captivity exercise. And then they did a cognitive test on them, and they gave them carbohydrate beverages, like a 12% carbohydrate beverage and a placebo beverage. And the carbohydrate beverage helped them to recover and perform better on this cognitive test after this massive stress, right? So that is a massive, I suppose, massively undervalued tool is some of the macronutrients, right? So
Hmm.
well, insulin and cortisol have a somewhat oppositional effect, right? So when your let's say you wake up in the morning and you go to work immediately and you start lifting heavy things, you haven't added any fuel into the body. So your liver glycogen is depleted. So there's little there to drip feed to, to keep your brain alive and your organs functioning. So the body will raise cortisol, and the cortisol will start breaking down lean tissue, and adrenaline will rise, and it will start um, causing fatty cells to release triglycerides and fatty acids into the bloodstream. So both of these will be used for energy, but I think people think that, oh, I'm not eating, therefore I'm burning fat. No, you're burning at least as much lean tissue. So not like fasting and workouts together, bad idea generally. Um, so that cortisol is elevating to stimulate this blood sugar or glucose production in the liver. So it's a great survival mechanism, like we already discussed. But the better thing to do is have a meal immediately after waking or soon after, and keep adding carbohydrates to the system, especially if you have these demands going on. And what happens is, let's say you do a CrossFit workout. So it's very likely that by the end of the workout, I don't know if it's like 90 minutes or 2 hours, it's very likely that by the end of that workout your cortisol level will be high. the
Hmm.
I believe in order to recover well, and if you don't have any specific body composition goals, like you have to be a specific leanness or weight for let's say MMA, you can just have a, a serious carbohydrate meal or drink, or I like honey personally. But if you have like 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrates, what that will do is the insulin increase will cause cortisol to go down, because when insulin goes up, it's basically a signal to the body we have fuel coming in that we have to partition into the tissues. So there's no need for cortisol to be high, right? So that's a very and what I do and what I discuss in the book, and I tell all my clients, and the ones that try it immediately, they're like, I've not felt this good and slept this good in years. And all that is 2 3 tablespoons of honey close to bedtime, let's say you brush your teeth, um, and then you go to bed a half an hour later earlier, have an hour before bed, have two, three, two up to 4 tablespoons of honey if you're a bigger dude or whatever. And um, that basically tops up your liver glycogen. So it takes you longer through the night to deplete this higher level of glycogen, which means it takes longer for the stress hormones like cortisol to have to kick in. So that's a really good way to keep cortisol low through the night and reduce lean tissue catabolism, right? So, just I cannot say enough good things about clean carbohydrates like honey, maple syrup, fruit and fruit juice, organic, of course, or white rice, organic, potatoes. These are kind of the cleaner stuff without too much grain, seed,
Yeah.
fibers, and polyunsaturated fats. So that's a big one. And then in terms of actual cortisol blocking effects, my favorite is, and you might think this is crazy, but I actually use progesterone. Now, that sounds like a something women should use, but men produce progesterone as well, and it has a direct antagonistic effect to cortisol. And
Mm.
today, because I'm doing my liver flush later today, all I've had all day is honey, and I can feel like I eat a lot, so I can feel my I it would suck if it kind of sucks when I don't eat a lot, right? Because I'm used to fueling myself very well. I'm not used to running on cortisol a lot of the time. So what I'm doing is I am using this progesterone to antagonize cortisol in a sense, to reduce lean tissue catabolism and to be less snappy and cranky as you can get when you're kind of hangry and whatever.
Yeah.
And it will also help me sleep tonight. So that's a really undervalued sort of thing, and you just don't want to take, as a dude, you don't want to take too much for too long. You want to kind of use it sparingly, like 10 milligrams or 20 milligrams 2 3 times a week, because it can a big dose can actually feminize dudes, and
Hmm.
apparently it can even shrink your penis temporarily, which I've not had that problem, but you just never know. You don't want to mess with this kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never heard of that, and or that product, and yeah, the carb thing, I think, is interesting because a lot of people are just like associating that word with just really heavy bread foods, right?
Mm,
But like you said,
yeah,
like there are actual healthy ones, right? That people wouldn't really think
absolutely.
of, like in certain, in like berries and fruits, and in this
Yeah.
case, honey, right? And how like how simple that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
To just to do, and like making sure that it's non-pasteurized and it's like
Sure.
organic and it's good, but um, um, I wonder if the I don't want to say lack of interest, but typically in people when they think about their life and they think about living a long life, and maybe why it's not so important to them, um, is because there's a responsibility to it, right? When we strive to be successful in our lives, right? Like as everyone does. I think there is an assumption that you're going to live a long life, but
Mm-hmm.
because we are susceptible to our pleasures and our temptations, that we're cutting back on our lifespan pretty much every day with what we're doing, right? And you know, I think to kind of slowly wrap this up to get into the whole fasting thing, because
Mm-hmm.
um, I've usually heard the praise of it, right, and
Yeah.
how you should be doing it regularly. And I'm a yogi, so over the last like 10 years, I've dove into the yogic rituals of the practices, right? And so fasting is a prized thing in the yoga world, right? But it's revered in a totally different way, right?
Yeah.
Where in like the kind of like exercise nutrition world, fasting is calculated as this uh, like logical thing where
Yeah.
you're doing it for the specific reason to lose weight, to be ketogenic, whatever. Where in the yoga world, it's very highly tied to spirituality, and the reason for it is to test your own willpower as well too,
Hmm.
where say if you're going to do a 24-hour fast, it's because you're specifically looking at the quality of your thoughts in your mind, right? Um,
Mm.
and so it's not so much because it's going to have this like physiological benefit to it. It's to really understand why we fall into the temptations that we do, right? So,
Yeah.
like I'm like you. I love food and I eat as much as I can because of the training that I do. And so when I look at fasting, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna pick it, do it on a certain day if it's a Saturday or Sunday because of there's like particular relevance to it. And I'm looking at what point does my mind and my ego start telling me that I need to eat food, right? And so
Yeah.
the the goal of it for me is then to wake up in the next morning that I succeeded in my fast and I've overcome these temptations, and that's largely it, right?
Hmm.
And I have a friend that lives in British Columbia, so I live in Alberta, in Canada, and I have a friend that lives in BC, and he works for a guy that does the most extreme fasting that I've ever seen, and the level of complications that he has with his digestive and with his health. Like my friend and I have talked about this. He is almost like deluding himself that what he's doing is really a good thing, and
The fasting.
yeah,
Wow.
and like
How
he'll
much
do
fasting is he doing?
basically like every day of his life. He's
Oh
if
wow.
he's doing some kind of like juice fast, or he's doing some
Mm.
kind of water fast, or he's doing, um, and I find that like it's there's this like mind virus within the world of like nutrition and stuff like that that there's these trends that people stick
Yeah.
to, and um, and I think it's because people don't appreciate the the patience and the amount of time that it takes to correct issues that we have, right? Like we
Hmm.
just want something to be fixed right away. So we'll jump onto this trend of like, oh, do this like 7-day juice fast. You'll get all these benefits, right? And they're not really
Yeah.
considering that like, if the conditions that I have is built on 10 to 20 years of neglecting my health, a 1 week thing like isn't going to correct that, like you have to
Exactly.
balance it out. Like I have to then be like, okay, well, I'm going to have to commit myself to this lifestyle change for the next 5 to 10 years in order to actually see the benefits, right?
Yeah, man. I definitely agree with you that fasting as a spiritual exercise can be very valuable, but I really think it's it's for the more advanced practitioner for sure.
Yeah.
The reason I say that is because usually if you're a yogi and you're doing all these other exercises, you have you probably have been living a clean life. Now the big issue, let's say you take a regular person off the street that's maybe 20 to 50 pounds over their ideal weight, if they just start fasting today, if you just starve them now, the very quickly what's going to happen is a bunch of obviously a lot of fat is going to get broken down, so it's called lipolysis. So there's going to be a lot of lipolysis going on, all these fatty acids will be liberated, and what will happen is a lot of those fatty acids are polyunsaturated, which we know that these are kind of the backbone or the precursor molecules for inflammatory mediators. Those fatty acids themselves are very fragile thus peroxidizable. And when it gets peroxidized, it it starts damaging things around it, and that has to be stopped by like something like vitamin E and antioxidant. So that's one thing, and that damage could be occurring in organs. It could be occurring in the blood vessels, the vascular endothelium, and that could be atherogenic, like atherosclerosis. So not a good idea for your regular Joe six pack off the street to start doing that. Then there's the what I was talking about earlier, those toxins that are lipophilic. They get sequestered in our fatty tissue as well, so we're releasing those when we fast. It's recognized in the literature as well. So that's a big reason why people shouldn't do that, right? Shouldn't just randomly start fasting. Now, for someone that's close to their ideal body weight, that they've been eating clean, they do the occasional detox, whatever, their liver is in good shape. Um, Fasting as a spiritual exercise most certainly can be beneficial. For example, um, coming up to the eclipse in April,
Mm-hmm.
I I want, and my wife and my daughter were away for about a week, so I had the space, but I wanted to fast, right? So I was fasting during the day, and I was eating little food as well when I was eating for a few days. Because also my birthday is on the 9th of April, so as it turns out, I was born on like this big eclipse thing as well. It's like because it happens every 18 years. So I was 38. So or sorry, 19 years. So it was like two eclipses old now. So
Mm-hmm.
it felt like coming up to it, I had like almost like this heaviness. It was a weird feeling. I think something was happening at a deeper level that I'm not sure I was understanding. Um, so there's definitely that value, but here's the thing, that's all fine and dandy for the more sort of adept practitioner, but what you said is perfect, right? Why are people fasting? Either to lose weight, to lose fat mostly, or because now we've been brainwashed that autophagy is so amazing. And when you think about it, you're starving yourself, the body thinks it's gonna die because there's no food coming in for like multiple days, for example, and it starts to break down less than optimally working organelles and things in the cells and whatever else. So it starts to consume itself, and that apparently is so good for whatever reason we've been told, right? So these are kind of the reason people are fasting for the autophagy benefits because of the cellular rejuvenation, and then because we're going to lose fat. But when you fast, you're losing 20 to 30% lean tissue as well. So it's really, it's impressive on the scale, but a lot of that, maybe a third is fat, but a lot of it is just water, glycogen, glucose, and lean tissue, right? So the problem is a lot of that lean tissue is from inside the body, like bones and organs and stuff. So you don't really see the detriment that it's doing. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the reason why um, I wouldn't really recommend fasting because when you fast, that's what you're doing. You're upregulating stress hormones, and as I already mentioned, these degenerate you, so they're literally breaking you down in order for you to survive. Now, at the end of the fast, you might feel amazing when you do the refeed. And again, if this was a spiritual exercise, you would have learned a lot about like maybe the devils inside you and Mara and all these things. But if you did it for fitness reason and then you feel better, you feel really good after, it's probably because your body thought it was dying, and now you survived this big ordeal, and like all these sort of endorphins and neurochemicals floating around, they're like your body's like, oh my god, I'm still alive, oh my Jesus Christ, that was amazing.
Yeah.
So I think you feel better because you freaking survived near death that kind of way. Yeah, of course you're gonna feel better after a fast
Yeah.
that you survived. So that's kind of thing, and because I know a lot of people probably listening to us understand the manipulations going on in society. I was at an Acapulco there in February. I was sitting with Charlie Robinson, um, and one of his sort of guests there. Um, we were talking with her. I gave her a copy of my book, and she's like, "Oh my God, I can't wait to read your book about the fasting stuff. I this whole time I thought it was so good for you." And this was all a bunch of anarchists there. So I went up to her and said, "Listen, if you're a king, if you're a ruler of the world, wouldn't you want to brainwash your subjects that starving themselves for multiple days at a time would bring them closer to God or is really healthy for them?" And then she's like, "Oh my God, that just clicked."
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about it, wouldn't you do that? Because it does make you weaker, you know, unless you're healthy to begin with, you feed really well, you do it intentionally. Most people are not ready to undergo that, right? So that's kind of a little bit of the rationale, but I do talk about the science in there. For example, there was one study, I think it was in Germany. They fasted the men for 8 days, I think, and they, for whatever weird reason, they were measuring their urine uroflowmetry testing, and they were measuring the size of their testicles, and basically their testicles shrank, their testosterone dropped something like in the region of 27%. Their DHEA, protective hormone, dropped. So, and then they were like, "Oh yeah, this was a positive result because their prostate volume or something was reduced, right?" And that was a positively framed study. I'm like, this, like, this is only positive if your balls are the size of tennis balls. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Like, so very weird stuff is going on in the science. Like they're getting horrendous results. Men are like their testosterone levels are dropping like 40% after the study, and they're framing that as a positive benefit. And if and I kind of joke in the book, who's like running the study? Dr. Mengele from the population department. Yeah, for him it's a good result, but think about it, you know?
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and like, so in the yoga world, from my understanding, is in the time of fasting, you're, um, depending on the fast that you're doing, if it's like Ayurvedic in nature, you're taking in a lot of different herbs. So, um, it's more of like a cleansing ritual than it is like losing or getting rid of
Sure.
anything, right? And like you said, you're right. Like, you know, the yogis that are practitioners of this, they are going to be cleaner people, right? So their body is going to be more prepared for it. And there is actually like preparation, like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
preparational rituals that lead up to it. So it's not just like
Yeah.
one day I'm like, oh, I'm going to fast for the next week, right? It's like, it's forecasted. They're like, hey, on
Yeah.
this day for this many days, I'm doing this, and I need these herbs on this day. I need these herbs on this day. Um, yeah, there's no consumption of food, but there is still something coming in that's going to help with repairing things. It's going to help with cleaning things out, and so
And sorry, just to add, so these
yeah.
herbs and things, a lot of them have anti. So one reason a lot of people feel better when they intermittent fast or they fast is
Hmm.
because they have an overgrowth of bacteria, and when they eat, especially when they eat starchy and sort of fibrous things, those bacteria ferment it and they might get gas and bloating and pain, or they increase their populations, and when they die they spill their toxins, their endotoxin it's
Hmm.
called it, these bacterial cell wall fragments into the gut that can get into the bloodstream, cause inflammation, right? So these people don't eat and they feel better because they're not feeding those bacteria. So with those people, I just tell them, look, why don't we just do a gut cleanse the, balance the ecology of the gut, and then you don't have to starve yourself for 18 hours out of the day, right? Or in the example you gave, when they're taking herbs and stuff, a lot of these herbs have anti-parasitic, anti-yeast, antibacterial
Yeah.
properties. So maybe there's a bunch of different stuff that they're doing that is beneficial. So they're giving like a whole cleansing of the gut, right? So there's the whole sort of the whole notion of preparing for it, respecting the process. It's like how you do ayahuasca, you do the dieta.
Hmm.
You don't just rock up in Peru and get the first sort of boat to a place and start drinking ayahuasca and puking your guts out. So you really have to revere the process. And what I would say to most people right now is, instead of the fasting, I would actually recommend what I'm doing today is a liver flush. or it's called a liver gallbladder cleanse or liver flush or gallbladder cleanse, whatever. Those are kind of the terms. You can Google it, right? And it's basically you have to eat clean for the durations of the 6 days of the cleanse, but I already eat clean, so for me that's not almost nothing changes. You take malic acid, which softens the gallstones in your liver, and usually in the gallbladder there's at least a few. And then on the 6th day, you don't eat any protein or fat, and then you drink some Epsom salts to dilate your bile ducts, to empty your bowels, and then you drink 4 ounces of oil with some citrus before bed. You lie completely still, and then that causes all of this bile. With the bile, like I said earlier, is a excretory pathway for toxins. So you're actually, all of these toxins get recirculated because bile gets recirculated. So with a cleanse like this, you're getting rid of the stones, the bile, a lot of the bile, and you are also giving your gut a break for a day. And there's so many benefits for your liver. And you do a bunch of these, like I've done probably more than 2,000 at this point. You do a bunch of these, a lot of things will already improve. And then with a better working liver, then you can definitely do some fasting, because then when you, like I said earlier, all those toxins and the polyunsaturated fats that get released, the liver has to process those. Now we know in the USA, for example, at least I think 30% of the people have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and some
Mm-hmm.
5% have non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. So people's livers are in a massive jam because they're so overloaded with PUFAs and whatever else. So a bunch of liver flushes is gonna do people amazing, amazing benefits that they would not get those same benefits with just fasting, because like I said, the liver will take the brunt during the fast, whereas with this procedure you're decongesting the liver and helping it to work better. And then of course that's a great preparatory phase for a fast.
Amazing. Yeah, that's well said. It's you've definitely done your research on this, and yeah, I think guys like you are needed in being able
Thank you, bro.
to properly explain the importance of these things, and we're like um, like demystifying and kind of debunking these kind of like hot topic terms and these practices where there's still a respect for some of the traditional views of it, but that there's a lot to learn and there's a lot to consider, and so yeah, maybe at this point I think can wrap it up. We had a great discussion, and yeah, uh,
Yes, this was
yeah,
great.
maybe just tell
we should
people. Yeah, go ahead.
we should continue this fasting discussion on my podcast. Maybe
Yeah.
you can give the spiritual side,
Oh
because I'm
yeah, for
sure
sure.
a lot of my listeners would love, and then we can discuss your work further.
Yeah, because in the yoga world, it's a big thing,
Hmm.
and it gets misconstrued, right? And that's why it's important to discuss it this way. Like, it's I've done it really only a handful of times because I share the view with you. It's not something that you should just implement into your life willy nilly like that. For me, I forecast it in advance and I go, okay, on this day I'm going to do, and I don't do more than like a 24-hour fast, but
Yeah,
definitely interested in your book and the practices that you have. So
I'll send you a copy, bro.
yeah, for sure, that'd be great. And um, yeah, we'll definitely get into it the next time we talk. And I'm in the
Absolutely,
process of moving next month, and I'm gonna have like a different setup. So I'll have you back on, and we can go a little bit deeper
for sure.
into these topics as well.
Oh yeah.
If you want to tell the folks where to find you and yeah, what your books are, and we can wrap it up from there.
Yeah, yeah. My website is just my first name, last name, ChristianYordanov.com. Has links to my podcast, books, and other stuff there. And I'm also on Instagram now. I started doing more Instagram in the last month and a half. So folks, if they're there, they can connect with me there. And I got the idea to start taking questions. So if you have a question about health, you can ping me on Instagram, and then at some point I'm gonna do an episode and address the question on my podcast. So I think that that'll be a fun way to get new content ideas and help people out with their whatever questions they have. So yeah, and Zorananda, thank you, brother. This was a great pleasure.
You're very welcome. The links will be in the description of this episode. And thank you again for listening, for contributing. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Enjoy.